Well, hello there, how is everyone? I hope you're all well on this fabulous Thursday. You're looking amazing, by the way. You obviously had an easy morning. Continue looking amazing throughout the day, into the weekend, through the other day. You know, just always look amazing. And remember this, being beautiful doesn't always have to be polished. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you're nothing less than beautiful. Nobody. And make sure that your partner, your significant other, recognises it and tells you every day. And if they don't, slap them. Anyway, we're talking about the kill kit. Because Steve Goncalves, he said, and this is Steve Goncalves is a guy who he's a bit of a conundrum, if you ask me, because on one hand, he doesn't seem to be sure whether Brian Koberger's the guy, and then in the next breath, he will say that Brian Koberger killed because of jealousy, this, that, and the other. And, you know, then you'll sort of hear that Madison's a target, and then you think to yourself, what's that got to do with jealousy? I don't really get it. It would have made more sense if it was one of the other girls, like Xana, because she had a boyfriend, and Kaylee because she... Do you see what I mean? There's some bits and pieces that get said, and if you pay close enough attention, they don't always make sense, and they certainly become contradictory in nature. But in this most recent sort of expose, if you like, that wasn't really an expose, it was just going over what we already knew. Steve Goncalves had said that the person who did this, let's say that, the person who did this brought in a kill kit. And when you think of kill kit, you think, right, so in this situation, what would that look like? So what are we saying that this person brought in? So what we're saying is, first of all, we're thinking, what would be the point of it? What would be the purpose for it? So first of all, we've got the weapon itself. The weapon itself. Now, Steve has alluded to the fact, and so has the coroner, that the injuries that these victims sustained almost points towards that there was multiple weapons. Not just one, but multiple. Now, that's not necessarily the case, and I'm spitballing, and I'm only spitballing because of information that has come out that we have access to. So, before you attack me, chill out. Yes, there could indeed be multiple weapons. We've kind of been... There's numerous things in this case that we have been conditioned to accept as gospel. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So we hear that there's a K-bar knife sheath. So we automatically think that the K-bar knife sheath belongs to the murder weapon because we've been conditioned to think that. So K-bar knife sheath belonged to the murder weapon, and the murder weapon was a K-bar knife. We don't have the knife. We don't have a murder weapon. And we know, for those of you who have watched and paid attention, that even after finding the knife sheath, they continued to look for knife sheaths during the searches. They were looking for knife sheaths and knives. So, look, they were looking for stuff. So we've been conditioned that way. The same with the white Hyundai Elantra. Many people now have been conditioned to think that the killer drove a white Hyundai Elantra. So they feel that because Brian Koberger's got a white Hyundai Elantra, then... So what are we saying? It's a coincidence that Brian Koberger drives a white Hyundai Elantra and the killer drives a white Hyundai Elantra. Well, surely that means that Brian Koberger must be the killer. No. What that means is you've been conditioned to think that the killer drives a white Hyundai Elantra. That's not what's happening here. What's being said is they're saying that Brian Koberger is the killer and he has a white Hyundai Elantra. But that's not necessarily the same as what you're being conditioned into believing. Does it make sense? If not, drop a message down below and I'll explain it to you more in depth. But this kill kit, so we're thinking it could be the weapons. So they've gone in there and they've got weapons. We also know that this person left the property and didn't take anything out of the property. And seemingly they didn't also... Well, we were led to believe there wasn't like loads of footprints all walked around the house where they've gone from room to room to room. So could this have been cloven? Could this have been cloven that went over the black cloven that Dylan saw? Certainly, but then what we've got to think of in terms of that. So this person has come into the house, they've gone upstairs, and you've got what happened upstairs first. Kaylee and Maddie first, and then Ethan and Xana downstairs. So he goes upstairs, comes downstairs, this altercation happens downstairs, and then what are we doing? We're getting changed. We're getting out of our clothing. So we're getting out of our clothing. We have touched on this briefly before. We have touched on it. So then what we're saying is that that person has got a bag to put the clothing in. So I'm thinking, so if they're wearing gloves, anything like that, they're not necessarily bringing a kill kit into the house. They must have already had it on, surely, mustn't they? They must have been wearing it. They must have had a bag that they could have put the clothing in that would have been covered in, in blood, sadly. Or another bag, maybe a black bag in the pocket of the clothes. I don't know. I struggle to understand when someone says a kill kit, because when I think of kill kit, I think of almost like torture implementation. I think, did this person tie them up? Were they bound? Were they gagged? And then I go back to time. We have a time frame for the attacks themselves that are narrowed down to approximately sort of 8 minutes. Let's be generous and say 8 minutes. That includes the going from the car, going into the house, any apprehension in getting to the house. Because look, this is what I struggle with. This person must have, there were people awake in the house, had just taken a delivery of food from DoorDash. So either the person who did this didn't even know that, they didn't see it, they just. And if we're talking about Brian Koberger, and I've touched on this before, the DoorDash came from the same place he came from at just about the same time. He would have literally, at that time of the day, followed that car all the way in. He would have literally, that would have been the only other car on the road, I imagine, going from Washington to Moscow. And again, I'm spitballing. That might not be the case at all. But at that time in the morning, for them two to be on the road, well, anyway, I digress. But a kill kit, I think, what is a kill kit? Clothing, overalls to protect your clothes. And then I'm thinking about the car. Could the car have been prepped? And then I'm thinking to myself, but when would Brian Koberger have prepped it? Would he have prepped that car in broad daylight in the car park of his apartment? Or maybe he drove somewhere else and prepped it before, because he couldn't have left his property with that car prepped, or that would have been sitting out in the car park prepped and ready to go. Surely someone would have, because that would have had to have been prepped, within an inch of its life. The steering wheel, the seats, the gear selector, everything would have had to have been done. The floor, the mats, everything. For that to have nothing in it whatsoever, not a hair, not a dog hair, not a skin, nothing whatsoever, then that had been prepped within an inch of its life. I'm not buying the fact that it couldn't, it could have been prepped 100%. But my issue is when. Because if they're saying Brian Koberger left it X amount of time, then that car was either sitting there prepped, and someone could have potentially looked and thought, what the fuck? Or he'd done it earlier on in the day and someone would have seen him doing it outside and thought, what the fuck? But for him to have left at the time of which he left wouldn't have given him enough time to completely prep himself, prep his car, in my opinion. And he goes to do this crime, goes into this house, and I do think to myself, yes, he could have bound his hands. He could have bound his hands in tape and, his shoes, and worn, a coverall of some description. But you've still got to then get that off. That's going to make noise as you're trying to, if you've got tape to protect, getting anything on your own skin or anything like that, it's going to make noise when you start pulling all that off and ripping it off. Or again, if they've just got an overall of some description, but you still then got to get that off without getting anything on yourself. You are then in the house without protective coverings on. Unless you're wearing them, you then go out of the house and do it outside the house. But then if you've done it outside the house, then surely you've then got the same issue of bringing stuff outside the house. To me, it doesn't make sense. But having coveralls or whatever he's got on if he's taken them off in the house in this scenario, then picture this. So does he do what he does in Ethan and Xana's room, and then takes all of his clothes off, all of his coveralls, and then he's standing in the room that this has just happened in with his other clothes on, that could have then put more of his DNA on other things. He's then got to get out of the door, shut the door, because we know the door was shut because Ethan was apparently up against it, which is questions in itself. Or does he go out of that room and then he's standing in the space between Dylan Mortensen and Ethan and Xana and starts undressing and taking all this off outside what would be Dylan Mortensen's room? But then surely she could have potentially looked out of the room and saw a bloke getting undressed and changed into someone else. But then you hear on the grapevine, whether it's true or not, that there is someone seen by Bethany Funk who is naked. And is that what happens here? Does someone strip off butt naked in that house and leave the house to get into a car with nothing on? And is that why there's nothing found in Brian Kohberger's car? Is it because Brian Kohberger was the driver? Does that even make sense? But when Steve Goncalves says about a kill kit, I can't fathom out what he means by that. I can't understand what... Because for me, in this crime, the only thing that could be pointing towards, unless Steve Goncalves knows that something else happened to these, like they were tied, they were bound, they were gagged, there was more time involved, there was more injuries that show that there was other stuff that happened that we have no idea about. But if it was just simple as someone went in here, spent 8 minutes in here, and you know, it was what we think it was, then what does he mean by kill kit? You know, surely he could have just said that this person came in with a coverall of some description. They protected themselves. I'd like to know what his thought process is there. What has he seen to point towards that? And I'd like you to let me know down below. What do you think Steve Goncalves actually means when he says that this person went in there with a kill kit? What specific items are we saying that this person went in with? Because if we're talking about protecting himself from getting blood on him, for instance, I still struggle for the life of me to see how that factors into the time frame and how you would safely get yourself out of the clothes that you did it if you're in the house without then transferring from yourself to the house any further DNA. And then we've got these other DNA samples that have apparently still gone unidentified. And that's then when you think that then does make sense, doesn't it? We've got a glove outside with unidentified male DNA and 2 samples in the house. Open your eyes, people. This case ain't as straightforward as what you think. Let me know down below what you think. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And let me know if I'm an idiot. Can I just not work this out? It's a strong possibility. I'll catch you in the comments. See you in the next one.